So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining in and participating in the 2022 Lake Pend Oreille State of the Lake meeting. It's very easy for me to say that, but the reality is we are very appreciative that you're being a part of this and that you're participating this evening and taking time out of your day and out of your busy evening after work to chat with us and to hear about what's going on in Lake Pend Oreille. So thank you. My name is TJ Ross, and I'm the Regional Communications Manager for Fish and Game here in the Panhandle region. I'm also joined this evening by Chip Coursey, who is the Regional Supervisor in the Panhandle, Andy Ducks, who's the Regional Fishery Manager, Ryan Hardy, who is the Principal Fishery Research Biologist on Lake Pend Oreille, and Ken Bowens, who is the Mitigation Staff Biologist in the Panhandle. So as in previous years, the goal of the meeting this evening is really, there's a few parts to it. One is to provide you all with an update about what's going on in the various fisheries in Lake Pend Oreille. Secondly is to give a summary of what's planned for 2022. And then lastly is to hear from you all and to answer questions. So we're looking forward to hitting on all three of those. And along those lines, I just want to reiterate that, that we are listening to what you all have to say. We value the comments, we value the questions, we value the input that we receive from you all. And we find ourselves, hearing a variety of different comments and questions, and we're left in the place of trying to take all of that information and make the best decision possible. And so I state that just because there's a lot of desires when it comes to Lake Pend Oreille, and we're trying to balance all of that. And so we are listening to what you all have to say. And also that to assure all of you that we're going to be answering the questions tonight with respect, with honesty, and with transparency. And our request to all of you is that that you all do the same with the questions that you ask and how you ask them. So this meeting is being recorded, and the reason for that is that we're going to be posting this on our website and on Facebook and on YouTube within the next week, so that anybody listening tonight can go back through and review any of the content if they'd like, or if somebody couldn't attend this evening, that they can also get their hands on it and get a chance to review what's covered this evening. Before I go into a few housekeeping items for tonight, I would like to formally introduce the other Fish and Game staff that are participating this evening. And I'm going to have each of them do that themselves. And so we will start with Chip Coursey.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Chip Coursey. I'm the Regional Supervisor here in the Panhandle.
This is Andy Ducks. I'm the Regional Fishery Manager here in the Panhandle.
Yeah, hi there. My name is Ken Bowens. I'm a mitigation staff biologist working with the CFSA settlement agreement on Lake Pend Oreille.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Hardy. I'm the Principal Fishery Research Biologist on the Pend Oreille system, leading the fish research on Pend Oreille.
So to reiterate TJ's comments, thanks everybody for participating this evening. I hope most or all of you had a chance to look at the presentations that were pre-recorded. This is by our count anyway, our 16th State of the Lake meeting. We've spent most of the last 20 plus years working to turn the Lake Pend Oreille fishery around. For those of you that were around the turn of the century fishing the lake, you know how dire things were, and they continued to get pretty bad until we kind of bottomed out on Kokanee in 2007. We started the formal State of the Lake meetings in 2006. And we've used this every year to kind of get people up to speed on what has transpired in the previous year and our efforts to bring that Pend Oreille fishery back. It's and also to hear from anglers. From our perspective, it's been a very rewarding process to go through with lots of people helping us out, and to see the results that you've been seeing on the program that was recorded. So we're here to take your questions and hopefully give you some good feedback, and we really appreciate everybody attending. So enjoy the evening.
Okay, so just real quick, when we initially scheduled this meeting, just to clarify that we scheduled this back in the wintertime, and we as a state agency were required to adhere to pandemic related restrictions on large crowds. obviously, we're hopeful and we're optimistic that next year's State of the Lake meeting will be held in person. That's the plan. But knowing that things can and do change rapidly in the realm of the pandemic, we'll obviously be playing that by ear. But please believe me when I say that we miss in-person meetings. We miss being able to see everyone eye to eye and being able to interact with the people that we serve, which is you all. So we're excited to be moving in that direction again and looking forward to being in person next year, hopefully. You've probably noticed at this point, but you all as members of the audience don't have the option of turning on your audio and your video for this meeting. We're not trying to silence anyone. This is simply from a technology standpoint. So we don't have any audio problems or any additional audio problems, I should say. And so that's the reason that this meeting is structured that way. However, you will be able to easily interact with us through the Q&A feature, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. There is a Q&A button that you can press, which will open up a dialog box that you can use to type questions. And those questions will be seen by us, and we will start working through those questions. And so this, as I mentioned earlier, this meeting, or maybe I didn't, but this meeting was made up of two parts. The first part was the pre-recorded video presentation that Chip mentioned, which we released on April 1st. Along with that video was a form for submitting questions. So that video basically gave an update on everything that we've learned and done over the past year relative to fisheries in Lake Pend Oreille. As of this afternoon, nearly 400 people have watched that video. So it's been pretty good reach on that video, and we've received around a dozen or so questions in response to the video. And the video that that we released last year for State of the Lake had received around 1,000 to 1,200 views. So it's definitely getting out there. People are getting the information that they're desiring, which is great. So the second part of the meeting is tonight, and it's a question and answer session. We are here to answer questions. And as we promised, we're going to begin by working through the questions that were submitted before tonight. And then after that, we'll begin working on questions that you all submit through the question and answer function. So we do encourage everyone in the audience to ask questions. That's why we're here tonight. So please take advantage of it and submit your questions. However, nestled within that, we do encourage you to limit your questions to those that are related to the pre-recorded video. That's really what we're trying to focus on tonight. So as I mentioned, the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen is what you use to submit questions, and we will see those on our end. So with that, I think we will launch into our first question that was submitted before tonight. And that question is, I think it would be great to expand on the tagging program, taking enlarged photos showing the information on the tag, telling the public how to report it and what information is going to be asked of them. And for that, I will turn it over to Ryan.
Yeah, definitely happy to take that one. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. So we ended up putting a couple of slides together just to illustrate this, to allow people to kind of visualize what they may be looking for when they catch a fish, if it has a tag or not. And so what we're doing here, this is this here in the circle, this is an example of a floy tag. And what we do is we tag fish in order to try to get an estimate on angler use, angler exploitation or harvest, and also an idea of reporting rate, tag loss. We get a lot of information from those tags. So when you catch fish, one of the things you'll look for is the tag is placed at the base of the dorsal fin, as you can see here. And then when you look on the tag, sometimes you'll have to maybe wipe some algae off of it to make sure you can read the tag. But first you're going to see on one side, you'll see whether or not it's a reward tag or not, a dollar amount. Some of these are reward tags and some are just non-reward tags. And then the tag number is on the other side. And then if you look, also there's a Fish and Game number there, a toll-free number, as well as a website. So there's two ways that you can report the tag. And I guess one of the things is also it could have two tags. Some of these fish have double tags so that we can determine tag loss, but they are the same, basically recorded with the same fish. So it doesn't matter which tag is recorded or reported. The other thing is that if it has a reward tag, you do need to remove that tag in order to claim that reward. And the other thing is, when you catch this fish, don't feel like you need to harvest it. You can write the number down, take a photo of that number. You can even remove it if you need to. Either way, it's easy to do that. If it's a non-reward tag or with a reward tag, you do need to remove it. Yeah, I think that's what they look like, just so you know what to look for when you grab the fish out of the water. Some folks have said that they aren't noticing it until they release the fish that it had a tag. So sometimes they get covered with algae and you have to just kind of look for it, but it's at the base of the dorsal fin.
Okay, so the next question here. Although the Gerards are showing signs of being larger than in the last couple of decades, some anglers feel that the quantity of rainbows is still lagging. One main concern is that the northern pike and walleye are eating the rainbows as they leave the tributaries heading for the main lake. I'll pass that over to Ken to start.
Yeah, so I'll start off with that question. One of the things that we're doing is there's a tributary monitoring program that we have that there's 25 of the tributaries or streams that enter Pend Oreille, and we visit each of those streams every 5 years. And when we do that, we're doing backpack electrofishing, which is a non-lethal way of sampling the fish. And so we count them and measure them and weigh them and all of those things, and calculate fish densities in the streams. And so we've been through all of our tributaries almost 3 times now, and almost across the board, the rainbow densities have been increasing in all of the tributaries that hold rainbows. So the number of juveniles and the reproduction is going well. It seems like those numbers have increased from the first time that we sampled them to the second time, and then I'll pass it on to Ryan, and he can talk about the rest of the question.
Okay, I'll just share my screen one more time here. One of the indications that we look at for density, and I think it was in the presentation, that it's relatively difficult to get an abundance on rainbows in the lake, simply because of the open water nature of it. Just our gear doesn't lend itself to being able to effectively get an abundance estimate of mark recapture. So one of the lines of evidence that we look at are the bycatch that we have in our lake trout netting. And we release the majority of these fish alive. And as you can see here, the catch rates for not only rainbows over 30 inches, but all size classes has steadily increased since the start of the suppression netting. And I think the one thing that folks need to kind of remember is that there is a limit to, how many rainbows that the lake, that the kokanee population can support. So I think we know that we can increase size. We know that it will steadily increase numbers as it influences fecundity and survival in the lake. But there are other limiting factors when it comes to rainbow numbers. Like Ken was talking about, habitat is also a limiting factor for rainbows. So those are the kind of things that just to remember, we're increasing the kokanee prey base, and we're successfully increasing not only numbers but size of rainbows. As you can see, those numbers over 30 inches have steadily increased as well. And I guess the second part of that is the concern about pike and walleye. And certainly we pay attention to that, and we share that concern. That is one of the reasons why we are proactive on our suppression of and walleye and pike. And so on the flip side of that, we do feel that we have enough kokanee out there that it's probably going to be darn hard for a pike or walleye to pass up kokanee and try to get rainbows. But those are the kind of things to consider. And we're certainly watching walleye and pike and trying to determine how their numbers are doing in the future.
And I'll just add a little bit to that question. So I think the important part to recognize there, the information that Ken and Ryan both shared shows that not only are we seeing that rainbows are increasing in the tributaries, and the number of juvenile rainbows is as strong as we've seen it in a very long time, but we have indications from within the lake, the population is trending upward in recent years. So in terms of abundance of these fish, things are increasing. Now, for anglers that still feel like, you know, those densities aren't high enough and maybe your catch rates out there aren't high enough, I guess I would just offer that rainbows are an apex predator. And so these are fish that we don't expect to be out there at such a high density that they're going to offer really high catch rates. And that's kind of the nature of a trophy fishery, right? Is, you know, these are fish that you're going to have to put some time in to catch. And in addition to that, there's a lot of kokanee in the lake right now. And so another factor that can come into play is when these fish have a really abundant food supply, it can be more difficult to get these fish to bite, frankly. I mean, there are times when these fish are going to be satiated and you know, a little bit less prone to being caught by anglers, I think, than at times when food isn't as abundant. So anyway, just a few things to keep in mind in that regard. And then finally, just with regard to walleye and northern pike, I think, yeah, just to reemphasize that walleye, certainly we're putting all the energy we can into keeping that population at low density. One of those reasons being to make sure they aren't having impact, not just on kokanee, but on these other species like rainbows and bull trout and cutthroat. And pike is something that we're watching, and whether we're going to have to ramp up our efforts, you know, anymore, we'll see. But certainly our research is going to be focusing on that more in coming years.
Yeah, and just to add to that, maybe a little bit of a historical perspective. In the 1990s, when we were building the at that time current state fish management plan, which includes all the basins in the state, we had a target that was vetted with the public, vetted with the Fish and Game Commission for producing at least 20 to 25 fish in the 20-pound plus range for the rainbows. And I think we're at least there this year and probably well over that. So, as Andy said, this is an apex predator. It's not something you can have in superabundance, but I think another indication that, and those targets back in the 90s were based on the good old days of the 70s and 80s. So I think that's really kind of also a pretty good indication that we are doing pretty well at meeting or exceeding those types of objectives for large fish and taking advantage of what the lake has to offer.
Okay, next question here. There are quite a few anglers that believe there are too many derbies on Lake Pend Oreille. Any response to this? And we'll turn that over to Andy.
Yeah, and this is a question I've heard from some other folks, and I'm going to assume that this person's referring to derbies that primarily are targeting rainbows. I believe we have 6 derbies that have typically been occurring on an annual basis for rainbows in the lake. And there are a few more now than there were a number of years ago, but somewhere right in that neighborhood of six a year. And as a manager, I'm really not losing any sleep over whether those derbies are causing any harm to that rainbow fishery. And the reason for that is because most rainbow anglers are releasing their fish. Certainly during derbies, fish get harvested in order to be weighed in as part of the prize structure and whatnot. But there's really not a lot of these fish that are being harvested, and our regulations are still designed to protect these fish. Whether you're fishing out there as part of an organized derby or whether you're out there fishing just on your own time, you're still bound by the fishing regulations that are in place, which are designed to support a trophy fishery. And so the amount of harvest that we're seeing occurring out there on an annual basis from derbies, from other types of angling combined, is quite low, and certainly is not showing any indication that it's limiting either the abundance or the ability to produce large size fish in this population. And on top of that, we've even seen derbies adapt a little bit. And in recent years, there's been some changes to at least some of the derbies out there that now offer the ability for fish to be weighed in and released. So some of that is occurring as well. That again, just speaks to there is not enough harvest of fish going on through these derbies to it'd be problematic from at a population scale.
All right, next question. The size of the current kokanee have declined to the point where most are too small to be practical for consumption, resulting in low numbers of keepers. Given that 27% of the kokanee returning to Granite Creek are the product of natural spawning, in spite of Fish and Game blocking spawning kokanee passage for the two most optimal months of the spawning season every fall, the egg take at Granite Creek seems largely unnecessary at present time. At what point will Fish and Game reduce the quantity of eggs taken and or eliminate the egg take at Granite Creek altogether in an effort to facilitate natural spawning and prevent size reducing overstocking?
Okay, so I'm going to start my response here just with a little background for folks that may not be familiar, but the kokanee population in Pend Oreille is supported by both wild spawning fish that are spawning on the shoreline and in some of the streams, as well as fish that we stock at Granite Creek and then collect eggs from when they return as adults to spawn. And so this question is really getting at, do we need to continue to collect eggs from these kokanee and rear them in the hatchery and stock hatchery kokanee into the system? And certainly we recognize that in the last several years, we've had some really high kokanee densities, and especially in that time period from about 2017 till about 2020, we had such high kokanee densities out there that the fish were pretty small. We had some years where an adult kokanee may not have been much 8 inches, and those fish just are hard to catch and they're not particularly appealing to anglers. And so those years, the kokanee fishery itself was not great. Certainly there were a lot of kokanee out there to provide an abundant food supply for predators in those years. But what we've seen the last couple of years is we've started to see kokanee density, although it's still really high, come down just a bit, and the size is starting to respond. And so the fish out there last year and what we expect for this year are more in that 10 to 11 inch range that Pend Oreille has traditionally supported. Now, if there's folks expecting to have kokanee in Pend Oreille that are 14 or 16 inches or 18 inches, like you see in some other water bodies, especially like reservoirs in southern Idaho, that's just not reality for Pend Oreille. That's a more unproductive system. We just can't grow kokanee that fast, and particularly in a system where we're having a strong presence of these predators. But what I would say to that is that we have reduced the number of eggs that we're taking at Granite Creek. So in recent years, since the fisheries started to recover, we've been stocking about 5 million kokanee a year. If you go back in time to when the kokanee fishery had collapsed and we were trying to recover the fishery, we were typically stocking 10 to 15 million kokanee a year at that time. So we've throttled it back to try to balance that a little bit more and kind of find hopefully kind of that sweet spot where kokanee are big enough to provide a recreational fishery. But we also want to still maintain some amount of stocking out there because, as we've talked about, predation and kokanee, that predator prey dynamic is pretty fragile, and we can't always anticipate a few years in advance how strong that kokanee population is going to be. So continuing to stock at least at a base level kind of guards against having a downturn in kokanee that would cause problems either for the recreational fishery or for having that abundant food supply. So that's our expectation, at least in the near future, is that we would still collect eggs, stock something in that neighborhood of 4 to 5 million fish a year, but not stock so many fish, that we're each year going to expect to have really poor size.
All right. Next question. Will Fish and Game ever stop micromanaging Lake Pend Oreille? Back to Andy.
Okay, so yeah, micromanaging, I guess I'll assume from that question, folks would like to see us not manage as much as we are, not have as many different management actions in place. And it certainly would be nice to not have to manage this fishery as intensively as we do. The reality is there have been so many alterations to the Pend Oreille system over time. Everything ranging from changes that have been associated with the dams that are now present in the system and how those influence availability of habitat to, dynamics within the lake, to, development that's occurred, and in particular, the establishment of a lot of non-native species over time. And so in order to continue to provide the kind of fishing opportunity that Lake Pend Oreille has historically offered, and that the public has continually told us that, a strong majority support, it requires that we do implement a lot of these management actions in order to maximize the performance of the fishery. And another objective we have is to sustain some of the native species that are in the system. And that would be very difficult if we weren't doing some of the management we are, such as lake trout suppression, for example. So I think the reality is that the type of fishery you have out there right now and that's performing at the level it is because of the level of management that we're doing. And if we were not doing that, it would be a very different fishery that likely would not be as appealing to most anglers. Another aspect to this, though, is that there are certain things that we are looking to in the future that hopefully will become less active management. One of those is the amount of netting that we have to do on the lake to keep lake trout suppressed, for example. And so we've been doing that program now since 2006 at a similar level of effort. And we've done some work in recent years to kind of forecast where that's headed and how do we maintain lake trout at a low density into the future. And we're anticipating that if we can maintain the level of effort that we're currently at for several more years, that there's a very high likelihood that in the next roughly 5 or so years from now, we're going to be able to start scaling back the amount of netting effort substantially. And I know there's anglers out there that are anxious to see less net in the water. We would like to have less net in the water if we can do that. And so that's something that we're working toward. We also have netting that gets done as part of the walleye suppression work. That's something we're going to continue to evaluate. If there's an opportunity to, in the long run, do less of that, that would be fantastic. But we've got some work to do yet to see what that might look like. So anyway, that's just an example of one of the things where we do hope in the future to have less of a management presence out there, but also recognize that these are tools that we have in the toolbox. We're going to need to use them accordingly in order to provide, the maximum opportunity for angling in the lake.
All right, next question. What is being done to increase the average size of adult kokanee in the lake? We'll turn that one over to Ryan.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen again just to look at the size that should be expected maybe this year. So Andy kind of covered that as far as the types of dials that we have to be able to turn to influence size, and it's pretty limited. We did reduce the egg take in Granite Creek, as he said. One thing to consider is that kokanee size, and I think that was pretty well discussed, is that kokanee size is majorly dictated by abundance of kokanee that are out there. If you have high abundance, you're going to have low size and expect to see larger sizes if the abundance drops. Last year about this time, we didn't have the survey done, and Matt talked about the abundance and size of 2-year-old fish, and he predicted that likely you guys would see that the 3-year-olds that you're catching would be nearing about 9 to 10 inches. And lo and behold, the survey showed that we were right. And he was he was able to predict that. We do see the same kind of thing this year when we look at the abundance and size of 2-year-olds. So we do expect that that is going to hold up. So we should be optimistic. The folks that actually did go out there last year reported some good catches, and they were happy. I guess the one thing that we do have to consider, and if you saw the presentation, that we do have Mysis that this last year showed to increase. And so those are the kind of things that can influence abundance and size. So those are the kind of things that we're going to be watching pretty closely.
All right, next question. I have always thought that the Mysis shrimp were a prime food source for Kokanee. Now it seems that they are a food source competitor. Could you please explain how these two species interrelate? And that'll go back to Ryan.
Yeah, that one worked well. So I'll go ahead again. So Mysis shrimp, I think the intention was that they would feed Kokanee. So they were introduced in Lake Pend Oreille in the 1960s. They were first introduced into Kokanee Lake, and it actually worked in Kokanee Lake. It looked like Mysis were feeding Kokanee in the North Arm, and so because of that pilot project, they decided to go ahead and try to introduce those into lakes all across the West. And they took in some places, and some places they didn't. They put them in Pend Oreille, again, hoping that they would be good food source for Kokanee. I think the one thing that we didn't count on was that it's in deep lakes like Lake Pend Oreille. Kokanee and Mysis do not occupy the same space and time. So during the daytime, Mysis shrimp are deep, and Kokanee are up more shallow, and in the nighttime, the Mysis go to the surface. And so because of that, the issue was that they didn't actually influence Kokanee abundance or survival. So I think that's the one thing that was a big learning experience for folks that actually introduced those. And the other thing that I'll just point out is that Mysis shrimp in the lake, and I'll just reiterate what was in the presentation, is that we saw a collapse of Mysis shrimp in 2012, and we don't exactly know why. To some degree, it was seen in other water bodies across the Northwest, and we're still trying to determine whether or not there's a dial there that we don't know about. But it was a good opportunity for Kokanee to rebound, not only because the predator density was so low in the lake, but also Mysis density was low. So perfect opportunity for Kokanee to rebound. And we started seeing those numbers just continually increase. So as I said in the presentation before, we saw an increase in 2021 of Mysis density. And it is concerning for us. We definitely want to keep track of how this is going to influence Kokanee carrying capacity. And so it's something that we want to be very transparent that that's happening, and report what we're seeing in the population as a result.
All right, the last question that was submitted before the meeting. Can you tell us when walleye netting will occur? And we'll turn that over to Andy.
Yeah, so we're just about ready to start that spring walleye suppression effort. So just as a reminder, that's a 15-day netting effort that occurs each spring. And we're going to begin that this coming Monday. So that'll be April 11th. And it will continue through April 29th. So if you're out on the lake on any Monday through Friday in a time period, you can expect there to be nets being operated. Most of that typically occurs kind of in and around the mouth of the Pack River Delta. There also will be a lesser amount of netting that occurs in some other areas around that north end of the lake that could extend from, the area in front of the Clark Fork Delta across that north end to around the Long Bridge. But again, most of that's pretty heavily influenced right around the mouth of the Pack River. One thing I would remind anglers is if you are out on the water, in those areas, keep an eye out during that time period for buoys, the markers that are on each end of the nets. So these buoys are spaced pretty far apart at times. Keep in mind, these are big nets that we're operating, and it's just impractical to be able to put buoys every 100 feet or something like that. If you're out there and you see these buoys, know that there's net set between those buoys, and typically the net is if you were to kind of draw a straight line between those buoys, the net will be there or on the shore side of those. So if you're trying to go around them, give them a wide berth. Typically it's going to be safer to go on the outer side of those rather than between the buoys and shore. So just to try to keep from getting tangled up. And then one last item on that is, we're setting these in the morning for several hours at a time. So if you see them out there first thing in the morning, just know that they aren't going to be out there all day. And so if you want to, boat through that area or fish in the vicinity, check back later in the day and those nets will be lifted and should be out of there.
All right, so we do have one more question that was submitted before the meeting. I've tried to catch some of the walleye a few times and struck out. Can you offer any advice as to where I could find them and how and when to fish for them? I would lean toward trolling a fish type plug, but have never fished for them. I will be teaching a hunter ed class and can't be there virtually. Any advice would help. And that's going to go over to Ryan.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer that. So I'll share screen again. I just like visual aids. So if you see the map here, this was in the presentation before. So you can see where most of the angler incentive returns are being recorded. A lot of them are at that northern edge of the lake, the Pend Oreille River or the Clark Fork River. I think one of the things from our fall walleye index netting that we saw is that Odin Bay, Sunnyside, those are areas that we see a concentration of fish when they're spawning. In the Pend Oreille River, one of the places that we've seen good concentrations of walleye in the fall are down towards the town of Priest River, just up the Priest River on the south side of the river there on the south bank. And also in the Clark Fork River in the springtime. A lot of anglers will concentrate on that delta area because walleye will be stacking up there like in March and things like that. As far as how to fish for them, we have seen some really good YouTube videos out there to talk about how walleye are being targeted in Pend Oreille. And in addition to this, we've heard that North 40 has put on some clinics for showing people how to catch walleye and what type of gear to be using. So those are the kind of things that if we can help direct, we will. The other things that anglers should be looking for is we have telemetry out there currently, and as we did last year, we're going to be putting together regular updates on where our telemetred fish are being picked up by our receivers. We have about 50 walleye being tracked at any one time in the lake and the river, and receivers all around the lake. And about in the springtime, all through about the mid part of the summer, we'll be putting out updates about 2 to 3 weeks at a time, and then probably once a month once we get into the summer and late fall. One thing to note is that in the Pend Oreille River, fishing is good up until about November, and right around November, those fish are out of there and they end up going back to the north end of the lake, and so they don't stay in the river or the Clark Fork for that matter. So that's what we have, and if there's any other questions, you can certainly contact me here at the office, and we can try to lend a hand on where the latest updates are.
So now we're going to move into a time of receiving questions live through Zoom, through this meeting platform. And I'm going to quickly show you, share my screen here. Oh, hold on. And walk you through what that looks like in case you are not familiar with it. So this is probably similar to what your screen looks like right now, except instead of my name, you can see my face instead. So down in the bottom center of the page, there is a Q&A button. If you click that Q&A button, if you click that Q&A button, it pulls up another screen with a box where you can type your questions. If you type a question in, which is better, cats or dogs, and you hit send, that is going to cue us that you have just submitted a question. So use that Q&A button down at the bottom, and we will start working through those. We've got a few questions that have come in already, so encourage you to keep them coming. And we're going to work through these as they were received. So the first question that came in the recorded video, there was mention of juvenile lake trout suppression. Are you counting juvenile lake trout as all ages pre-reproductive ability? What age are you seeing juvenile lake trout recruiting to the suppression effort? And Ryan is going to take that one.
Yeah, so we look at size and age. Our nets are 2 and 2.5 inch, and then we then pick up at 5.5 inch. So we miss a size group and age group in there, and that's by design so that we can protect those reduce bycatch of bull trout in certain areas. As far as when it comes to the age that they recruit to the gear, we typically see 2 and age 3 when we see them fully recruit to our gear. And then there's a time period where we don't see them. And so at that age, they could already be mature, but our nets should be able to get them after they have entered that maturation. They typically mature around 4 or 5 years old. But long-lived species and can reproduce for quite a number of years.
All right, next question. It seems that the radio telemetry on walleye in Lake Pend Oreille have historically been in the shallows and or along bridges and mouths of rivers and other tributaries. I'm not a Kokanee fisherman. It seems to me, however, that Kokanee seem to remain in the depths at 30 to 50 feet or greater. It doesn't appear that walleye have had an impact on the so-called prized Kokanee fishery. I'd ask that you please reconsider the calling of walleye by gill netting. I understand the devastating potential of bucket biologists introducing them to other lakes. Walleye, if I understand, are natural and that they were not planted by a bucket biologist, but by migration from Noxon. A North Idaho walleye fishery would mean an extensive influx of monetary value by out-of-state license sales and stimulus to the local economies. Likewise, gill netting targets other important species such as crappie, bass, bluegill, and pike. I feel that Lake Pend Oreille is a prime resource for an abundant fishery of all species. It's plenty large and deep enough. I believe Andy is going to take that question.
Yeah, so there's kind of several questions embedded there, but I think in general, this one's getting at basically a desire to have walleye, more abundant walleye population out there, and why are we managing against them? The beginning of the question talks about the depth use by walleye. And certainly we're seeing that walleye are using a lot of shallow depths in the lake. But an important part of that, and this is something that we showed in the presentation, is that even at times of year when walleye are primarily occupying shallow depths, they are still making these deeper migrations at times down to 100 or even 150 feet. So what that suggests that these walleye, as they're known to be, are pretty opportunistic predators, and they are at times moving into greater depths where they do overlap more with kokanee. We're also seeing that seasonally, when surface temperatures are cooler, kokanee do use shallower depths, and especially when we have high densities of kokanee, they'll even occupy areas that are closer to shore. And so there are times a year, even shallower than 30 to 50 feet, that kokanee and walleye overlap. So we've definitely documented walleye consuming kokanee. We are trying to finish up a project that we're expecting to end this summer. It's been a 2-year study looking at walleye diet in the system, and that's going to give us even better information about what these fish are consuming, not just throughout the course of the year, during different seasons and such. But definitely kokanee are part of their diet. Another thing I'd mention is that we're being proactive with walleye, and we haven't yet seen walleye have devastating impacts to kokanee, but the point of what we're doing is to try to prevent that from happening. And so we're trying to maintain walleye at a low density before they have the opportunity to become abundant enough that they could become more of an impact to kokanee. And I'll mention too that, you know, we've put a lot of thought into this, not just ourselves, but some of you that have attended previous meetings have heard us talk about the meeting we convened in 2018, where we brought some noted walleye experts from the Midwest and Canada out to visit with them about this very situation. And the group unanimously agreed that if we allowed walleye to continue to increase in the system, that there was a high potential for them to, as they got to higher density, start to move out from those shallower habitats on the north end of the lake and become more prominent offshore predators on kokanee. And so that is something that we're trying to head off before it has a chance to become a problem. Given how much we've invested in recovery of the kokanee population, it's just not a luxury we have, especially with the track record walleye have elsewhere when it comes to the predation impacts they can have on kokanee and other trout species like we're managing for in Pend Oreille. TJ, if you could scroll back up, I know there was another part of that question I was going to try to answer. You know, I think another part of this that was asked is the person understands the devastating potential bucket biologists, but they understand that walleye were not planted in Pend Oreille and that it was from migration and from Knox Reservoir. To the best of our knowledge, walleye probably did arrive in Pend Oreille from just natural dispersal down the Clark Fork system, but they were illegally introduced into Montana. And so even if that introduction didn't occur directly into Pend Oreille, we're dealing with, you know, the byproduct of what was at one point an illegal introduction. And so regardless, this is a species that, you know, we have to look at, you know, what their potential impacts would be on the system. Can we maintain a fishery into the future? And although walleye would provide additional angling opportunity and certainly can provide, you know, this person mentions like an economic stimulus to the area because of the walleye fishery, but there's also a tremendous economic stimulus that's being provided to the local area from the fishery that we have out there right now, which is performing at a really high level. And so that would be lost if we were not able to sustain the kokanee population over the long term. And so these are the challenges we have. And this is why we spent some time in the presentation talking about, you know, this medley of predators we have in the system now and how we have to make some of these hard decisions. And really all the fish that are in Pend Oreille right now are largely compatible with having a sustainable fishery into the future, with the exception of lake trout, walleye, and northern pike. And so unfortunately, we have to manage against those 3 fish. But again, a reminder that these fish aren't going to entirely go away. They're going to offer some angling opportunity out there. We're just not going to be able to provide these kind of high catch rate type fisheries that I know some anglers would like us to, but that's just not something that we can do and kind of keep everything functional the way a lot of anglers are wanting us to. Last part of that question too was a person asked if taxpayers and anglers are owed a certain number of the netted walleye. I think this is getting at, you know, when we net walleye, do we, I guess, owe it to anglers to distribute those fish to them? I think that's what the question's getting at. And I guess what I would say to that is, you know, we've come up with a system to try to make sure those fish go to good use. And so we've been distributing them to local food banks, and those are helping folks in the community that you know, need that. And it's just very difficult for us to come up with any kind of a reasonable program to distribute those fish to, for example, all license holders. that would be very difficult. So I think we have a program that's been well accepted within the community. The fish are getting used when we distribute them to needy folks in the community. And that's the best approach we've been able to come up with at this point.
All right, the next question here is the research and data learned from Lake Pend Oreille, has it been able to apply to other lakes in the US? And I believe Ryan. Okay, Andy's going to take that one.
Yeah, certainly the work we've done here has been applicable elsewhere. In fact, we have garnered attention from fish managers and others throughout the country, and in fact, in other countries. The recovery of the Lake Pend Oreille fishery over the last decades being viewed as one of the largest success stories that we have, certainly in the region, and I'd argue in the country. This has been a big deal that has not been easily attained in a lot of other waters. And so we've had routine inquiries from folks elsewhere about how we've gone about that, and we've shared information with folks at professional conferences and various other formats. And then another thing I would share with you, I think that's notable for a lot of anglers here, is in recent years, we've had a lot of dialogue with folks, the managers up at Kokanee Lake, British Columbia. And so I think a lot of our anglers here understand that Kokanee Lake has kokanee and Gerard strain rainbows that are both native to that system. And that's kind of the origin of where we, got our fishery in that regard. And that at times has been an incredibly productive fishery in its own right. But in recent years, there's been a predation issue in Kokanee Lake, and they don't have the challenges that we do with a lot of the non-native predators. But even with rainbow trout and bull trout in that system, there can be instances where you can end up with too many predators and have a difficult time maintaining an abundant kokanee population. And that's been the case in recent years in Kokanee Lake. And so we've been consulting with them a lot, trying to trade notes to help them understand how they might, try to get that fishery back functioning at a high level again. So bottom line, a lot of people are paying attention to the Pend Oreille fishery right now. And it's definitely provided a lot of lessons learned to other folks. And especially with regard to lake trout suppression, this is the first example of successful suppression of a lake trout population at a large scale. They're certainly starting to see success in places like Yellowstone Lake at a large scale, but not to the extent that we've had success in Pend Oreille. And so, it's had a lot of influence on other water bodies, not just our local fishery here.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, next question. You keep saying there's an abundance of kokanee which are small in size. In lakes that have historically had small stunted perch, an introduction of a predator such as a tiger muskie seem to be the solution. Why would you continue efforts to gillnet pike and walleye in an effort to decrease predator populations when the predators seem to help with the increase of the size of kokanee? Are the kokanee lovers wanting more kokanee or larger kokanee? And then Andy answered some of this question already. Also, are we as taxpayers and license holders allowed our fair share of netted walleye? I believe Ryan is going to take that one.
Yeah, I think we kind of described this a little bit, is that I think if we get a low density fishery for kokanee, certainly we see increased sizes. And I think we're clear on what we're working for on Pend Oreille is an abundant fishery that can support our predator base that we have objectives for. And I think the one thing that we've heard from fishermen they are satisfied with fish that are around 10 inches. I think most of them understand that historically Pend Oreille would have 8 to 10 inch fish. Occasionally you would go over that, but typically they are the canning size and smoking sized fish, and they're satisfied with that. I think we definitely understand that a lot of fishermen want more fish and bigger fish. Every fishery we hear that. It's a balancing act with Pend Oreille, and we're trying to not only support a fishery with kokanee, but also enough food out there to support growth of those predator fish species. So yeah, I think netting. I think we touched on why we are being proactive with northern pike and walleye netting, because at this point there is so much invested in trying to get this fishery restored. That is one thing that we are going to try to get ahead of and keep the lid on things before it gets out of control.
One thing I'll just add really briefly to Ryan's response is that, we talked presentation and earlier this evening about the increase we're right now seeing in the Mysis shrimp population. And so that's something else as managers that we kind of have in the back of our minds, is that in recent years with the downturn in Mysis shrimp, that's allowed us to have kokanee at a higher density. If we now see Mysis at a higher level and that sustains at that higher level, we know from history that that is going to reduce the carrying capacity of kokanee in the system. And so although in recent years, we've been able to have plenty of kokanee out there to go around, not only to support the predators that are out there, but provide a recreational fishery. And at times even have probably more kokanee than ideally we'd have out there to support a good fishery. If we start to see the shrimp population reduce that overall carrying capacity, it's going to give us less margin for error with the number of kokanee we need to support those predators. And this all comes back to, again, some of you are probably tired to hear us talk about sustainability of the fishery, but that's really what this comes down to. And it's a delicate balance. And we've seen this happen in Pend Oreille in the early 2000s when lake trout started to increase in abundance. We've seen it happen in many other systems with kokanee that are the primary prey source for predator species. And it doesn't take much at all to go from having an abundance of kokanee to having a population that starts to go into decline. I mentioned Kokanee Lake earlier, and that's another prime example where, just over 10 years ago, Kokanee Lake was firing on all cylinders, producing trophy fish, and kokanee were abundant. And in a matter of years, that reversed course, and that fishery is now really struggling. And so it's just a delicate balance, and some of these species that we know have the potential to really increase predation levels quickly, such as walleye. Those are just fish that we have to be fairly aggressive and try to keep at low density.
All right, next question. I am concerned about the bycatch. Would you consider moving to only angler incentive for 1 year to determine if it is effective in reaching the desired outcome? I believe Ryan is going to take that one.
Yeah, I think in our presentation, a couple of slides talked about bycatch. And one of the things that we found out early on is that we needed to take a two-pronged approach where we had netting as well as angling involved in trying to get the lake trout population to the objective where we needed it to be, which was prior to the 1990s level, to keep it at a level where we can maintain. And one of the things we saw from the angler incentive program is that anglers are really good at catching those fish that we miss in our nets, and we usually miss those. So we use the small mesh for juvenile, that we call that nursery netting or juvenile netting, and then we go to the 5-inch mesh, 5.5-inch mesh to get those spawning aged fish. And so the anglers are really working hard to get those. They're doing well at catching those sized fish that we don't catch. Unfortunately, when we look at the data, there is very little evidence that we could just rely on angling to do that. It looks like angling over the years has precipitously declined when it comes to catch rates. We still have a good amount of folks that are turning in heads, but we know that with the lower population, angling alone will not meet our objective at this time. We're needing the netting to continue to keep that effort up and allow us to meet that objective in a few years where we can possibly pull back effort. So that's where we're at with at least involving angling and netting at the same time.
These are great questions, everybody. Thanks for sending them in, and they're still coming in, so keep them coming. The next question, what do you do with the fish that you net? And Andy is going to take that one, I believe. Or Ryan, okay.
I guess I can take that. Andy kind of covered it. The fish that we catch, it depends on which fish it is. If it is a fish that we want to either put a floy tag in, or we need to put a transmitter in, it goes right into a holding tank, and that fish is worked up and then placed into the water. If it is a walleye or lake trout, the head is removed, and that fish is then put into a bin of ice, and then those go to the local food bank. And I will also say that that bull trout, when we get those fish, they are handled first, and we make sure that those fish are returned to the water very quickly.
All right, next question. With all the derbies, are there derbies that are going on at the same time? For example, bass derby going on while there's a rainbow derby. And Andy is going to take that one.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in general, we have a tournament policy that we allow one tournament to occur on a given day on most of our panhandle waters. But we do make exceptions to that for the really large water bodies like Lake Pend Oreille, if the tournaments that are occurring are different types of tournaments. And so what I mean by that is let's say on a given weekend, we have an application for a rainbow derby, and we also have an application for a bass tournament on that same weekend. That is something we allow, since those two types of tournaments are really not conflicting with one another. Now, if we had applications for two rainbow derbies on the same weekend or two bass tournaments on the same weekend, those are typically situations that we wouldn't allow, and we would ask those folks one of those groups to find a different date to hold their event. So short answer is, if they're different types of events, we can try to accommodate that and allow, up to two on a given day. There's not too many instances where that's a conflict, but there are instances where we have that happen.
All right, the next question. The management plan is clear on rainbows and cutthroats, but less clear on hybrids. Is there a management plan for the hybrids? Are they threatened like the Western cutthroat?
So for a little bit of background, hybrid rainbow trout and cutthroat trout can hybridize with each other. Generally, in the tributaries is the area that we're able to monitor this the most, just because of where we're at. And what we've noticed is that typically rainbow trout generally are spawning a little bit lower in the watersheds, and cutthroat trout are generally spawning higher in the watershed. So although they do overlap a little bit, for the most part, they stay separate. Our management is obviously, ideally, we'd love to have genetically pure fish of both species and not have them interbreed, but at times that does happen. So one of the things that we have noticed over the years is, with increasing rainbow densities, our hybrid densities have gone up just a little bit, but not to the point where it's starting to impact each population itself. So I guess that's kind of a long way of saying that, we're not trying to manage for hybrids. It's something that we don't want to have in the system. But, because of the mixture of species that we have, it's inevitably going to happen. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay. Since Lake Pend Oreille is managing against lake trout, pike, and walleye, will there be plans to have other lakes in the area managed for pike and walleye fisheries, much like how Priest Lake is managed for lake trout? Andy's going to take that one.
Yeah, so currently the Pend Oreille system is the only water in the Panhandle where we have walleye established. Frankly, we hope it stays that way. This is not a species that is compatible with the fisheries that we're managing for in the region, both in terms of trying to sustain native fish and also just trying to provide sport fishing opportunity. So our management plan addresses that for these illegal. So we won't be introducing walleye to any water, in the region. intentionally. And so the only way they would show up is via illegal introduction. So our management plan has a clear stance on that, you know, if something like that were to occur, that we would be managing walleye unlimited harvest and not allowing catch and release tournaments, and basically managing against the species. And so it's a little bit different with northern pike. We have had northern pike illegally introduced into a number of waters in the region. And so those are places that, again, we're managing those populations under unlimited harvest, not allowing catch and release tournaments, trying to promote angler harvest and keep pike populations at low enough density that they don't have too much impact. But we certainly have seen impacts from pike in a number of our waters. What I would say is that with pike, because they are now in a number of waters, there is opportunity to fish for pike. Again, one of these examples where, you know, even though we're have a management philosophy that is aimed at trying to keep them at low density, there's still fishing opportunity for pike in a number of our regional waters where we aren't actively going out and, you know, netting them like we are. And again, even in Pend Oreille, we don't have a targeted suppression program for pike. If we get our hands on them in the course of other efforts, we do remove them, but we haven't, you know, taken as aggressive an approach with pike as we have with walleye and lake trout to this point. So short answer, these are two species that just aren't very compatible with our regional fisheries that are typically dominated by, you know, managing for cold water species. And even in the places where we have warm water fishing opportunity, those aren't fish that would really be a desirable addition. So lake trout are a little different situation in the Priest Lake system, where, you know, we had gone through a recent public process that identified that folks wanted us to continue to manage Priest Lake for lake trout. And that's an instance where, you know, lake trout had been there long enough that they kind of ran their course, and they collapsed the Kokanee population, and we no longer have bull trout. And, you know, we've had other impacts in that system as a result of lake trout. And so that kind of all happened decades ago, and the damage has largely been done. And it's a matter of, you know, what would it take to, you know, restore that fishery. And to date, we haven't had good public support to pursue that. So we are going to manage it in favor of lake trout at this time. So anyway, hopefully that provides a little context.
All right, next question here. Can you please give an idea on where to fish for walleye in the Pend Oreille River? Should we stay closer to Priest River or closer to Dover? And Ryan is going to answer that one.
Yeah, so this shows where the anglers have been catching and reporting where they caught their walleye that they return. And you can see primarily the northern edge of the lake, and also the Pend Oreille River in the fall is really good, as well as the Clark Fork River. The fall walleye index netting indicates that those shallower areas by Odin Bay and Pack River Delta are good areas, Sunnyside, where they spawn in the springtime. And also, folks have said that when you go towards the Pend Oreille River in the fall, the Priest River just upstream of the town of Priest River on the southern shoreline is very good, or at least relatively good. And in the springtime, the Clark Fork River Delta is a place where a lot of folks are trying to get those walleyes as they kind of stack up and wait to enter the Clark Fork River. And the other thing that I mentioned is that in the Pend Oreille River, our telemetry shows that by about November, most of the fish have left the Pend Oreille River, and fairly quickly, and they go into the main area of the lake. And I guess I will mention that other folks have been asking about the southern end of the lake down by Idlewild Bay. And we don't tend to see very many fish down there. We do see that they move just about all over the lake, but the majority of them are in the northern shorelines.
All right, a couple of more questions here. And again, if you do have questions, now is the time to get them in. What was the Kokanee population prior to walleye introduction compared to now? I believe Andy's taken that one.
Yeah, so just to reiterate the history with walleye in the system, they were illegally introduced in Montana in the like late 80s, early 90s timeframe. We didn't officially document a walleye in our sampling in Pend Oreille until the early 2000s. And at that time, the Kokanee population was very low. That's when we were nearing the bottom, when the fishery was collapsing. Since that time, walleye started to increase. We started officially monitoring the walleye population in 2011. And at that time, we were just starting to seeing resurgence in Kokanee, thanks to the lake trout suppression work. And then we saw an increasing walleye population from 2011 until 2017. And that was at the same time we were rebuilding the Kokanee population following the lake trout suppression work. The last check on walleye was in 2020, and we had seen a reduction in catch rates that were back to, around the level they were at in 2014. And the next scheduled walleye population survey will be in 2023. So I guess the answer to this question is that as walleye have kind of had an increasing presence in the system over the last decade, that has occurred at the same time that we've been rebuilding the Kokanee population. But I want to reiterate that we've not yet seen walleye pose a population level threat to Kokanee. They've been at low enough density that hasn't become problematic. Our approach with walleye is to prevent them from becoming more abundant and prevent them from causing those issues on Kokanee. And so, yeah, again, hopefully that provides a little bit of background there. But certainly if we were not implementing suppression on walleye, allowing those fish to continue increasing in the system, there is a high likelihood that we would see negative impacts to Kokanee over the long term.
Okay, another question here. With two types of tournaments going at the same time, regardless of species, the issue I see is launch congestion. With limited launches, do you take this into consideration? Andy's gonna.
Yeah, we do. And certainly this gets to be a challenge because tournament anglers are, they're organized, but they're still anglers. And it's a challenge at times to know, who should have priority, I guess, at boat launches, if it's tournament anglers or non-tournament anglers. And certainly we try to do what we can to keep tournaments from just overwhelming launches, or at least providing alternate locations in the vicinity where non-tournament anglers can get boats on the water. And typically the way we're handling this, if we have multiple tournaments scheduled for a water body, like let's say we had that example of a rainbow derby and a bass tournament on the same weekend, typically trying to see those events not converge at the exact same locations where you'd have, for example, two derbies where you have your weigh-ins occurring at the exact same location and all boats getting launched from the same boat ramp. Or there are certain instances where we would look, if we had two exceptionally large events, if you had a really large bass tournament and a really large rainbow derby, that might be an instance where we wouldn't want those to be allowed on the same weekend, just for the very reason of overwhelming, public facilities. So yeah, there's some challenges there. By and large, I think we're able to kind of keep those things separated to the extent we can, but admittedly, and this isn't just because of tournaments, but I think as every angler is aware, with the demand for access in recent years, it's getting more and more difficult to get your boat on the water, not just in Pend Oreille, but other places in the region. And I think that's going to continue to be a challenge moving forward. And I guess a related question is, have we considered a new launch on Pend Oreille, possibly in Camp Bay? We're constantly looking for ways to improve access where we can. Recently we've done a number of things on the Clark Fork River that have helped access in the Pend Oreille system. Camp Bay specifically is not one that we've seen an opportunity, but we've also had some discussions with some folks about whether we could maybe look into an opportunity in Odin Bay in the future. I'm not sure how realistic that is at the moment, but short answer is, yeah, we're continuing to look for those opportunities. We work closely with Bonner County as well, who also manages access to the lake, and some of the other agencies as well. So it's, yeah, admittedly, it's a challenge, and not just to provide different boat ramps, but also boat ramps that are accessible at low water levels, which is a problem in the Pend Oreille system. We certainly would like to find a way to have a boat ramp in the Sandpoint area that is accessible at winter pool levels, but it's exceptionally difficult to find a place where that's doable. And with real estate costs and other things, it's getting harder for us to acquire properties where we can develop access. So there's some real challenges that we're facing on the access front, and we'll continue to, be opportunistic as we can. But like I said, there definitely are going to be some challenges moving forward to increase access in a lot of areas.
Yeah, just to add a little bit on the Camp Bay question. We are aware of the issue where there's some controversy over the public nature of the road that leads down to the water at Camp Bay. Regardless, that site is one that would be difficult, even if that were deemed free and clear public access. It doesn't offer much in the way of parking. It might be a site for a car top or a carry-in type non-motorized boat, if in fact that public access question could be answered more with more clarity than it currently is. But good question. Thank you.
All right, next question here. Do you have telemetry tags in Kokanee? And Ryan's going to answer that one.
Typically, we put telemetry tags to answer a question that we can't get out with other means. I don't know that we could put telemetry tags in Kokanee and they would survive. If they did, it would be a very, very small tag. But we get some of the answers that we need, some of the questions that we have that we answer with other means is looking with hydroacoustics to try to determine, for example, the depth that we see see Kokanee at certain times of years or temperature and so on. And when we're looking at walleye, for example, we have tags that not only look at distribution but also depth. And some of those things that we can answer with hydroacoustics for Kokanee, we can't with this other gear. So that's something that, if they were hardy enough fish to be able to do that, we might consider it if we didn't already have some of those answers with other sampling gear.
So I'm going to quickly share my screen here. We're not getting any additional questions coming in, but would like to share something with you all. Okay, so here on the screen, before we end here is contact information for Andy, Chip, Ryan, Ken, and myself. You could email any of us or call at the regional office. The number is right there. And ask for any of us. We're happy to answer any additional questions. Also, if you didn't get a chance to watch the pre-recorded video, there is a shortened link right here at the top of this slide that you can type into your browser, and it will take you to that recorded presentation that you could watch. So that concludes our 2022 State of the Lake meeting. Thank you again for participating this evening. Having the public engage is pretty central to how we function as an agency. So we really appreciate you being here. If you are interested in keeping up with what's happening in the Panhandle, I do encourage you to follow us on Facebook, IDFG Panhandle region, and we're posting on there constantly with updates, and then also on our website. Thanks again for participating, and have a great rest of your evening.